This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
A Mechaber Svarim, you could buy his Svarim in the back, though if you buy them, it means I can't use some of the material in drushes. So maybe buy them and, forget what you learn. Rabbi Gladstein is a prolific writer and a prolific speaker. It's mind-boggling. If you go to Torah Anytime, and you should, there are over 9,000 shiurim of Rabbi Gladstein. I did a calculation. If I would speak 3 times a day for the next 8 years, 7 days a week, the entire year, I wouldn't hit 9,000 shiurim. It's amazing. A few years ago, when my Rav and Pesach was Nifter, Shmuel Berkowitz, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, Rabbi Gladstein had come to Menachem Avil. The family wasn't sure what was the connection. When Rabbi Gladstein had given his 3,000th shir, I believe it was, my Rav had called to say, Yeshikach, I don't know you, but your shiurim are incredible, and I just want one yid to another, thank you for giving thousands of shiurim. That was 6,000 shiurim ago. It's really unbelievable. The Torah is sweet, it's delicious, it's thought-provoking, it's inspiring, it's really everything, and it's a tremendous zechus for us to have Rabbi Gladstein. I do want to thank Mitch Ronstrach, who's in Eretz Yisrael today, who put everything together. We thank him for bringing Rabbi Gladstein and all the great speakers we have, and it is a kavod gadol to introduce Rabbi Gladstein.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Maletsky, for the very kind and generous introduction. I want to assure you that your Rav is a very big Chacham, and the sign is, the Gemara tells us, Derech Chachamim L'daber B'lashon Guzma. It's an honor to be here. B'rshus the Rav, Rabbi Maletsky, B'rshus Rav Luban Shlita, who actually usually comes to visit me. When I was a Rav in a shul in Cedarhurst, Rabbi Luban used to come to visit family. So my father was in yeshiva with Rabbi Luban and always spoke in glowing terms of the esteem that everyone in the yeshiva held Rabbi Luban. So it's a real honor to be here. And especially this time, not just this time of the year, but as the events that are unfolding before our eyes, and we're trying to be able to put in proper context and be able to feel what should we be feeling now? How should we view these events? What is their historical context? What is our responsibility? So I would like to, by way of introduction, by reviewing a teaching of the Gemara that we're all familiar with, but it's probably appropriate to focus on it and really try to integrate it, especially at a time like this. The Gemara tells us that after 120, even though we're responsible, of course, for the entire corpus of Torasenu HaKadosha, but there's some big questions they're going to ask. One of those questions being, Tzipisa Yeshua, did you await the coming of Moshiach? Which at first glance is very unusual, that this is going to be one of the 6 big questions that is asked at the end of days. Did you await the coming of Mashiach? I mean, there's 613 mitzvahs. You would expect that the big mitzvahs should be those which we're most responsible for. Does it even say in the Chumash that there's a concept of Mashiach? Is the concept even mentioned in the Chamishei Chumshei Torah, let alone that this is going to be one of the questions that Hashem asks us? Did we await the coming of Mashiach? And although we know how important it is, and actually great tzaddikim lived with this ideal, where they lived their whole life always constantly awaiting the coming of Mashiach. My grandfather of blessed memory passed away the last couple of years. He was 106 years old. He was a survivor of Auschwitz, of Dachau. He was the Talmud Muvak of Rabbi Menachem Zemba before the war already. My grandfather would say that every single day in Auschwitz he believed be'emunah shalema that Mashiach was coming today. That's how he lived his life. You know, we all say we're awaiting the coming of Mashiach, but perhaps for many of us it's just a concept. My grandfather awaited Mashiach like you ordered something from Amazon and they said it's coming Thursday or Friday, and when the doorbell rings you say maybe that's it. That's how he awaited the coming of Mashiach. So by way of introduction, perhaps it's worthwhile to try to make this concept a little bit more real to us, a little bit more connected to our life. Let's try to identify certain junctures in time that are perhaps designated to await the coming of Mashiach. So the first one is in Shemona Esrei. If you'll notice, we say every day, 3 times a day, 2 brachos about the coming of the redemption. We say, V'lishalayim ircha barachim tashuv, and Es Tzemach David. And actually there is a discussion, are these 2 separate brachos, or are they one bracha? Because actually, you know, it's interesting on Purim, when you have the kroivets, the piyutim added on Purim, the Rishonim tell us that V'lishalayim ircha and Es Tzemach David do not have 2 separate piyutim, because perhaps the Tosfos writes they're really fundamentally one bracha, but we say it as 2 separate brachos. So what exactly is the distinction between Yushalayim and Es Tzemach David? So we would say, well, Yushalayim is rebuilding of the city, and Es Tzemach David is the restoration of the Malchus Beis David. But the Arizal in fact says no. The differentiation, the distinction between V'Yushalayim and Es Tzemach David is different. The Arizal tells us that there are 2 redeemers. There's something called Moshiach ben Yosef, and there's something called Moshiach ben David. And even though you might say, well, is that a Kabbalistic concept? The Gemara talks about in Masechta Sukkah. On Daf Nun Beis, there are Arba Charoshim, there are 4 carpenters, one being Moshiach ben Yosef and one Moshiach ben David. Says the Arizal, when you say in Shemona Esrei, V'chisei David, Avdecha Mehera L'Seicha Tachin, you should think, you should pray, you should daven, that Hashem should bring in safety Mashiach ben Yosef. Because Mashiach ben Yosef is the Kisei David. It's the throne, it's the foundation of David HaMelech. So when you say V'Yushalayim Ircha, you should be mechavein for Mashiach ben Yosef. But when you say Ki Lishuascha Kivinu Kol Hayoim, one should be mechavein to daven for the coming of Mashiach ben David. Says the Ari, so that after 120, when one is faced with the big question, Nu, did you await the coming of Mashiach? At least you'll be able to point and say, well, yeah, actually, at least 3 times a day, it was on my radar. So that means that, again, V'chisei David, one should be mechavein for Mashiach ben Yosef, Ki Lishuascha Kvinu Kol Hayom, Mashiach ben David. Let's identify another important juncture. Does anybody know? Little trivia question. What day of the week was the Beis Hamikdash destroyed? What day of the week? You have 8 choices. You only have 8 choices. What day of the week? Sunday? Close. That's close. But remember, I'm giving you 8 choices. So you say, what's the 8th choice? The Gemara interestingly says that both the first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash were destroyed, you're really right, Matzai Shabbos. Matzai Shabbos. The Gemara doesn't say Yom Rishon. The Gemara says Matzai Shabbos. Barishon ubeshniya. So the Maharal, of course, as he famously does, he says, Dvarim gedolim einim b'mikra. Great things are never coincidental. Why did Hashgacha have it that both Batei Mikdashim were destroyed on Matzai Shabbos? Says the Maharal that there's a concept in Jewish thought that there are cross currents between time, place, and person. It's called Ashan, Olam, Shana, Nefesh. There are certain times that correspond to certain places that correspond to certain people. For instance, says Maharal, what Shabbos is in time, the Beis Hamikdash is in place. And what the Beis Hamikdash is in place, Shabbos is in time. So Shabbos is, so to speak, the Beis Hamikdash of the week, and the Beis Hamikdash is the Shabbos of place. Let's explain that. You ever notice Friday night, As opposed to the rest of the week when we say Shomer Amo Yisrael Lo'ad, Friday night we say Ha Poireh Sukkah Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Amo Yisrael V'al Yerushalayim. What does Yerushalayim have to do with Friday night? We're not in Yerushalayim. We're in Edison, New Jersey, or Highland Park. I never know. Is it the same thing? I don't know. One day. That sounds like a loaded topic. I don't know. But we're not in Yerushalayim. We're at Shabbos. Why do we mention Yerushalayim in the Mara Friday night? Actually, there's a more basic question. You know, if you notice in Kabbalah Shabbos, in the Chadaidi, which was written about 450 years ago, at a time when you had the greatest all-time luminaries, the Arizal, the Alshich, the Ramak, Rabbi Yosef Karo, was written by Rabbi Shlomo Al-Kabetz. And actually, Rabbi Vadia has a very interesting tshuva, you know, that L'chadoidi spells out an acrostic, right? So, why do we say Shamar v'Zachar b'dibur echad? We should say Zachar v'Shamar. Zachar came first and Shamar came second. So most people would say, well, then it would say Lizlomo Chazak instead of Lishlomo Chazak. You know, so Rabbi Vadia offers that as a possibility, but that's not his definitive answer. We'll have to discuss that on a different occasion. But if you notice, the stanzas of the Chadaidi almost have nothing at all to do with Shabbos. Here it is. We've been waiting the whole week for this night. We're trying to greet the Shabbos, and almost nothing we say in the Chadaidi is about the Shabbos. Yeah, the first stanza, L'chadoidi, Shamar v'Zachar, L'kras Shabbos, that's good. So long as you're still up, we're talking about the Shabbos. But as soon as, you start to nod, we move on to a totally different subject. Mikdash Melech is about the Beis HaMikdash. Hisnari, Al Yad Ben Yishai is about the restoration of Malchus Beis David. Hisoiruri is we're asking Hashem to return Nevuah to the Jewish people. We're talking about the expansion of Yerushalayim. Here it is. It's Friday night. We've been preparing for this the whole week. We've been cooking and cleaning. We're trying to greet the Shabbos, and we basically ignore the Shabbos. And instead we turn our attention to speak about Yerushalayim, the Beis HaMikdash, the coming of the Geula. Why? Says Rav Moshe Shapiro, from here we see a very important principle. That what the Beis HaMikdash is in space, Shabbos is in time. Therefore, Shabbos and the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim in a certain sense are synonymous. There are similar concepts. Shabbos is the temple of the week, and the Beis HaMikdash is the Shabbos of the world. Therefore, says Rav Moshe Shapiro, an amazing idea. If you know why the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed on Matzai Shabbos? Because so long as you're headed toward Shabbos, the Beis HaMikdash cannot be destroyed. As long as you're moving toward Shabbos, you can't have Churban Beis HaMikdash. Because Shabbos is the Beis HaMikdash. The only way to have a Churban is if you're moving away from Shabbos. So you'll ask, we're never moving away from Shabbos. Sunday is Hayom Yom Rishon B'Shabbos. Monday is Hayom Yom Sheni B'Shabbos. Tuesday is Hayom Yom Shlishi B'Shabbos. You're never moving away from Shabbos. You're always headed toward. There's one time, there's one juncture that you're not headed toward, but you're moving away from. When are you moving away from? Matzai Shabbos. Therefore, the Beis HaMikdash could have only been destroyed Matzai Shabbos. Therefore, says Rav Moshe Shapiro, and he says a very interesting expression. Halacha lamasa. If you want to know, when we have this great obligation to yearn for the coming of Mashiach, when are you supposed to fulfill the ideal of yearning for the coming of Mashiach? When? Kabbalah Shabbos. The purpose of Kabbalah Shabbos is to be Mekayim Tzipisa Yeshua. You're asking Hashem, Mikdash Melech, please rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. Hisnari, restore the Malchus Beis David. Hisoiruri, bring back prophecy. We want Yerushalayim to expand. Does anybody know how far Jerusalem will expand to? Ad Damesek, until Damascus. Syria, I heard, is going to be very happy about that. Okay, that's a major expansion of Yerushalayim. And Asidin Eretz Yisrael, Lehisrachev. There's even an opinion in the Gemara that if you draw a line from about 35 degrees latitude horizontally and 30 degrees latitude horizontally, it would then include, Eretz Yisrael would expand and include many countries in North Africa, in southern Europe, Spain, part of Morocco, part of all the islands would all be incorporated. That's what we're mispalel for in L'Chadaydi. So that's definitely something that to think about. So it says Rav Moshe Shapira, halacha l'maisa, if you ever wanted to know, when I know I have this big responsibility of awaiting the coming of Mashiach, when exactly am I supposed to be fulfilling that? That is the objective and the purpose of Kabbalah Shabbos. So that's the second juncture that we're supposed to fulfill the great ideal of Tzipisa Yeshua. Here's another one. Let's come back to the original question. How could it be that one of the 6 big questions were asked after 120 is, did you await the coming of Mashiach? Where in the Torah does it even say you have to await the coming of Mashiach? So it's amazing. One of the Moinei HaMitzvahs was the Smak, Sefer Mitzvahs Katan. The Smak in the very first mitzvah, Anoichi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzesicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. The Smak says the mitzvah to believe in the reality of God who took us out of Egypt. Says the Smak, part of this mitzvah is to believe that just like God took us out of Egypt, He likewise will take us out of Galus. Part of the Emunah in Yetzias Mitzrayim is the Emunah in the coming of Mashiach. So it's not just the Gemara, Midivrei Kabbalah, is transmitting to us we have to await the coming of Mashiach. It's the very first, most basic mitzvah in the Torah. Part of belief in Metzios Hashem is awaiting the Geula, says the Smak. So the following idea occurred to me. Probably, in all of the beautiful writing of Ramban, the most well-known comments of the Ramban are the comments of the Ramban at the end of Parshas Bay, where the Ramban is bothered. Why do we have so many mitzvahs that are Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim? You wake up in the morning, you put on tefillin. Why do we wear tefillin? To remember Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. But before you even put on the tefillin, you walk through 5 doorways, and every doorway there's a sign, and the sign said, remember Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And then you said Kriya Shema, and you enunciate, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And then Emes V'Yatziv, you say it again. The entire day, wherever you go, every door you walk through, you literally have to take the events of Mitzrayim and tie it around your arm and your head. And in case you forgot, you need to stop in your tracks every 7th day and rest to commemorate Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. And if that's not enough, 7 days a year, you can't eat leaven to remember Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And in case you forgot, you need to leave your house 7 days a year and sit in a sukkah to remember Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. And if that's not enough, every 7th day, at night, you take a cup of wine and you need to say and proclaim to your whole family. The Ramban says, enough already. We didn't forget. Says the Ramban, the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim demonstrated the most basic tenets of our religion. There's a God. He created the world. He controls everything that happens in the world. Hashgacha pratis, prophecy. And God's not going to prove Himself in every generation. So He says, look, I did it once, and don't ever forget it. So every doorway you walk through, I'm going to remind you. And every morning, we're going to tie it around our arms and our head. And every Shabbos, you're going to announce it to your family. And whatever you've been doing the whole week, you stop on Shabbos to focus and to remember about the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim, so you never forget the basic tenets of Judaism. But it occurred to me that if you combine the idea of the Smak with the Ramban, namely, if we have so many reminders that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, and part and parcel of remembering that Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim is the emunah that Hashem will redeem us from this galus, that means that not only are we constantly reminded of Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're also constantly reminded to await the coming of Mashiach. That means every time you put on tefillin, and we remind ourselves, Lamantia Toiras Hashem beficha ki biyad chazaka yitziach Hashem me'eretz Mitzrayim, we are also reminded, okay, and I'm awaiting, the same way Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, I'm awaiting the coming of the Geula. And every doorway you walk through, okay, so don't lose the opportunity. The same way when a Jew walks through a doorway, so they're supposed to be alerted, Really nowadays, we get notifications every millisecond. You're getting a notification to do something. So every doorway that we walk through, it's a notification. Remember, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. But putting the smaks idea together with that, it's also an alert. Remember, Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim. Utilize the opportunity. I am now going to be fulfilling the great ideal, one of my main functions in this world, to await the coming of Moshiach. So far we've identified 3 times. 3 times a day. Ki lishuascha kivinu kol hayam. Friday night, Kabbalah Shabbos. And then I would maintain every mitzvah that Zeicher Liyetzias Mitzrayim is also a reminder to be Mitzapeh L'Geula. And maybe that's why we say, Ki Lishuascha Kivinu Kol Hayom. We're awaiting for you the whole day. What do you mean the whole day? The whole day. Every time I say Shemona Esrei, every time I say Kriya Shema, every time I walk through a doorway, every time I put on tefillin, every Shabbos, every Sukkot, every Pesach. But let's try to identify a 4th interval of time. And everything I said until now was by way of introduction, because rabbis always like to say a few words before they begin to speak. And the 4th juncture is right now. And when I say right now, I'm talking about the events that are unfolding before our eyes. I almost feel that in my lifetime, I think we've all seen a transition, because when I was a kid, if somebody would have asked, what Galus are you in? I always thought we're in Galus Edom. We're in Galus Edom. What do you mean Edom? We're not in Rome. The United States of America is the spiritual heir of the values of Judeo-Christian values. So we're Galus Edom. In fact, somebody showed me the Ben Ish Chai writes explicitly that Galus Roimi is the United States of America. There's such a concept. And somehow, sometime, things have transitioned, because we find ourselves in a new era. And this new era has already been foreseen, predicted, and it's called Galus Yishmael. It's very interesting. If you look in Medrash Rabbah and Bereshis Rabbah, throughout Sefer Bereshis, whenever in Sefer Bereshis we have the number 4, whether it's V'ha'aretz Haisa, Soihu, Vayu, Choshech, Al Pnei Sahaim, whether it's the 4 rivers in Gan Eden, whether it's the 4 expressions in the Bris Bein HaBesarim, Ema, Gedoylech, Hashecha, Noifeles, Alav, every single time the Medrash Rabbah says, it's referring to the 4 Golosim. Who are the 4 Golosim? The Medrash says numerous times. Bavel, Babylon, Paras Madai, Persia. I say the Media is the biggest Galus of all. Persia, Media. Then Yavan is Greece. Yavan is Greece. And then Galus Roimi, Edom, Rome. The Medrash never mentions Yishmael. And the Ramban likewise concurs. The Ramban in Sefer Daniel. The Ramban in many places also says that the 4 Golosim are Bavel, Paras Madai, Yavan, and Edom. What happened to Galus Yishmael? Is Yishmael not a Galus? Do they not commit sufficient enough atrocities to be considered exile? Why are they not a Galus? It's interesting, by the way, Ibn Ezra in Sefer Daniel says, in fact, Yishmael is the 4th and final Galus. And what about Rome? The 3rd, Yavan and Roimi, is the 3rd Galus. And Yishmael is the 4th. But the Ramban rejects that. The Ramban summarily rejects that. Because the Medrash Rabbah says in numerous places, the 4 Golosim are Bavel, Paras Madai, Yavan, and Rome. And Yishmael is not on the list. So Ramban says Yishmael is not one of the 4 Golosim. Why? Why? By the way, Arizal writes in Likutei Torah Parshas Kiseitze that in the vision of Daniel, where he sees this person, the head represents Bavel, the two arms are Paras Madai, the body is Greece, and the two long legs are Edom and Yishmael, the last two final long Golosim. But the Medrash consistently writes that the fourth Golos is Edom and Yishmael is not on the list. And the Maharal in Netzach Yisrael and in other places asks, why is Yishmael not one of the Golosim? What time do I have till?
What did you want? Okay. Moshiach.
This is the question of the Maharal. The Maharal wants to know, why is Yishmael not on the list? So since you gave me extra time, I'm going to tell you the first answer that the Maharal doesn't like. I like it, but the Maharal rejects it. I want you to know the first answer, and then I'm going to tell you the answer that he does like. The answer the Maharal does not like is, Maharal says you have to understand what is a Galus. What is a Malchus? And why does Klal Yisrael have Malchus? Says Maharal, the purpose of Malchus is Malchus, Beis David, reflects the Malchus of Hashem. God is the King of the universe. But how can we perceive and recognize God as the King? God needs a throne. What's the throne of HaKadosh Baruch Hu? God's throne has four legs. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, David. David comes from which Shevet? Yehuda. That's why it says the Shlach Kadosh in this week's Parsha, when Yehuda is born, Vata'amoid Miledes. Amida, stability. When Yehuda is born, it gives stability to the throne of God. Through the aegis of Malchus Beis David, God's Malchus is reflected in the world. But comes the Babylonians, and the Babylonians conquered the Jewish people. They hijacked Malchus Yisrael, and whatever power should have belonged to the Jewish people now belongs to Babylon. They've usurped our koyach. And then Persia came and they conquered Bavel. So they took the Babylonian power, who has our power. And then Greece came and they took the Persian power, who took the Babylonians' power, which is our power. In other words, there's one source of Malchus, either we have it or they have it. Says the Maharal, though, Yishmael never took our power. Yishmael has an independent source of power. Yishmael's source of power is the tefillah of Avraham Avinu. Avraham David, Lu Yishmael Yichya Lefanecha. If only Yishmael would live before me. By the way, the Zohar HaKadosh writes, we have tainus on Avraham for saying that tefillah. We say, Avraham lo yavinu ata. You're not our father. You prayed for him more than you prayed for us. Says the Maharal, because Yishmael's source of power is not sourced in Malchus Yisrael, it didn't make the list. But the Maharal then says, let me tell you the definitive reason why Yishmael is not one of the four Golosim. But before I do that, I want to share with you a Gemara in the beginning of Masechta Avodah Zarah. The Gemara tells us that in the end of days, God's going to take out the Sefer Torah. And He's going to say, whoever learnt, supported this, come get your reward. So all the nations are going to line up. All the United Nations is going to convene. And they're going to vote to unanimously that they should get reward. That's going to be the only thing they ever agreed upon. They should all get reward because, of course, they love the Jewish people and they support Israel. And they're going to claim that they are the great advocates and defenders of the Jewish people. So they're going to come and they're going to clamor, and God says, order please, one nation at a time, says the Gemara. First Rome comes in, and Rome says, we built bathhouses, we built marketplaces, we built stores, everything we did was so that the Jewish people could learn Torah. And God's going to say, you blithering fools, shoyte sheba'olam, that's not why you did it. So our Rosh Hashiva used to say that they're right. That's what it's for. But Hashem is going to say you're a fool because that wasn't your kavanah. And then the Gemara says the next nation to come into claim reward is Paras, Persia. And Persia is going to say, we waged wars, we conquered cities, everything we did was so that the Jewish people could learn Torah. And God's going to say, you fools, that's not why you did it. Ask the Gemara, why are these the only two nations to come in the end of days? Rome and Persia. Says the Gemara, because these are the only two chashuv nations. Because these are the two important nations. Ask the Gemara, what makes them chashuv? Answers the Gemara, because Mishum dahanach mashchi b'malchusayu adaasi meshicha. They're the only nations that will last until Moshiach comes. You hear this? In the end of days, there'll only be two superpowers, Persia and Rome. And you look at this Gemara and say, huh? Persia and Rome? The Roman Empire is long gone. You go to the imperial city of Rome today, you see a lot of headless statues. There's nothing left of the Roman Empire. And Persia? Persia was conquered long ago by Greece, by Yavan. And yet the Gemara says the only two nations to stand until the end of days are Rome and Persia. Now, if you accept that the Roman Empire continues in the guise of USA, then at least we understand half of this Gemara. Rome represents the Western world, the Western ideals, Judeo-Christian values. That's what the Gemara means, that Rome will last until Mashiach comes. But what in the world does the Gemara mean that Persia will last until Mashiach comes? You say, I know, Iran. If that makes you feel better, then go for it. But Iran has nothing to do with the Persian Empire. Not ethnically, not genetically. They're not the same culture. They're not the same race. They're not the same. The Persian Empire fell 1,500 years ago. If you want to see a relic of the Persian Empire, you could go to the British Museum. You wouldn't believe what they found. They found a mug that a Persian drank hot chocolate from 1,500 years ago. But they don't have the cup, they only have the handle. That's what's left of the Persian Empire. So what does the Gemara mean? That these two nations will last until Mashiach comes. But even more troubling, there's another Gemara. And this Gemara is really frightening. Because if you'll accept that when the Gemara refers to Rome lasting until Mashiach comes, that it's a reference to the Western world, the Gemara in Yuma Daf Yud Amud Aleph is downright frightening. The Gemara says that in the end of days there'll be two nations standing, Rome and Persia. Who will defeat who? Now here it is, in this great country, on this great day, a day of gratitude. Haidu Lashem ki tov ki li'olam chasdai. The Gemara seems to come out, according to most opinions, Amar Rebbe, Asida Roimi Shetipo Biyad Paras, Rome will fall to Persia. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Asida Roimi Shetipo Biyad Paras. So if you accept that Roimi refers to the Western world, the Gemara brings two opinions, Rebbe and Rabbi Yochanan, that Rome will fall to Persia. The Gemara brings one more opinion, the opinion of Rav. Rav says, Asida Paras Shetipo Biyad Roimi. Persia will fall to Rome. So whoever Paras is, whether it's Iran, whoever it is, we're thinking, I like Rav. I'll go with Rav. I'm going to sit here comfortably in the tri-state area, screaming, convening a bezdin, that the halacha is like Rav, that Asida Paras Shetipo Biyad Roimi. So I want to share with you, the good news is, Tosfos in Avodah Zarah, when he refers to this Gemara in Yuma, only brings the opinion of Rav. But the bad news is that we don't seem to hold that way. So there are a few questions we need to address. Number one, really in the end of days there'll be two nations standing, Rome and Persia? Is that what we see in the world today? I mean, the Gemara, unless you say, it's an agadata, we don't know what it means, it's allegorical, it's. But that's what the Gemara says. So let me share with you the answer the Maral does like, And according to this answer of the Maharal, these two Gemaras, the heavens open up, and you'll see how 1,500 years ago the Gemara predicted to a T what the world will look at like in the end of days. Says the Maharal, you want to know why Yishmael is not one of the four Golosim? It is one of the four Golosim. Really? Which one is it? Paras. Paras? Yishmaelim and Persians, what do they have to do with each other? Says Maharal, the definition of a Golos is not a religion, it's not an ethnicity, it's not genetics, it's personality. And the personality of the Persians, the Gemara says, is they wage wars and they conquer cities. Those are Yishmaelim. Says Maharal, Paras and Yishmael are synonymous. Accordingly, when the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah there'll be two nations standing in the end of days, Paras and Roimi, United States of America and the Arab world. That's the Maharal. And that's exactly what we see. There are two world superpowers today. And if you want to know what about this nation, what about that nation, the Gemara doesn't discuss them. The Gemara tells us who the players will be. Paras and Roimi. That's the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. And now the frightening Gemara is the Gemara in Yuma. Who will defeat who before Mashiach comes? Is it Yishmael? Will Yishmael defeat the Western world? Or will the Western world defeat Yishmael? And what's amazing is it's a subject to Machloikas. Rabbi Yochanan hold Asida Roimi Shetipo Biad Paras. USA will fall Biad Yishmaelim. That certainly does not make us feel good. But the good news is I didn't come here to make you feel good. That's not my job. Your rabbis have to make you feel good. They got you a nice breakfast. I'm here to report the facts. The facts are Rebbe and Rabbi Yochanan hold Roimi will fall to Paras. So you say, good, I hold like Rav. I'm a Tosfos man. If you look in Tosfos on Beis Amud Beis, when Tosfos summarizes the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, when Tosfos in Avodah Zarah, which says there will only be two nations standing, Tosfos points out, and the last one will be Roimi, like the Gemara says in Yuma. But I would humbly maintain, if we could say such a thing, that there seems to be pretty definitive viewpoint that Asida Roimi Shetipo Biyad Paras. What indication is there? Let's start with the last Balaturim in the end of last week's Parsha. You know how Parshas Chayei Sarah ends. Parshas Chayei Sarah ends, Al Pnei Kol Echav Nafal V'yela Toldos Yitzchak. Says the Balaturim, when we see the downfall of Yishmael, that's when Mashiach ben David comes. So wait a second. That means that the Maharal saying the last nation standing will be Yishmael. Yishmael will fall, and then Mashiach will come. That seems to be like Rebbe. That seems to be like Rabbi Yochanan. That Asida Roimi Shatipo Biad Paras. There's a Gra. The Gra says something out of this world. The Gra, in his commentary to Safra Ditzniusa, there are a few things in the Gra's commentary on Safra Ditzniusa that are, understandable to all of us. One of them is the Gra says, why do we have two Mashiachs? Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. For what? What do we need two for? So the Gra says something very interesting. You ever wonder, anybody here have cows at home? Anybody have donkeys? Good, just checking. Okay? Are you allowed to plow with an ox and a donkey together? Can't do it. Loisach roish b'shar v'chamor yachdav. You ever wonder, why not? Why can't you plow with an ox and a donkey? The Gra says the ox represents Esav. Esav is compared to a bull. The donkey represents Yishmael. Shavu lachem pa'im hachamar. You never want to mix Esav and Yishmael. If Esav and Yishmael ever get together, they would destroy the world. My grandfather wrote in his memoirs that when he was in Auschwitz, Eichmann invited a special guest to join him in Auschwitz. the Mufti from Jerusalem. And he remembered that Eichmann and the Mufti sat together arm in arm, and they would march Jews in front of them, and they would hit the Jew in a way that they would never be able to reproduce, and that was their entertainment. You want to know what a world looks like when Esav and Yishmael get together? Auschwitz. So when you see, Arafat and the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of the United States shaking hands, watch out. Watch out. If Esav and Yishmael ever get together, says the Gemara, they would destroy the world. Says the Gemara, that's why. When Yaakov stole the brachas from Esav, Esav says, I really hate Yaakov. What does Esav do? Vayelech Esav el Yishmael. That's how I could destroy him. Says the Gemara, that's why we need to keep Esav and Yishmael apart. So it's a big bracha that Hashem makes this divide between the Arab world and the Western world. That's what gives the world viability. Says the Gemara, we need two Mashiachs. Mashiach ben Yosef. Yosef is compared to a shar. Bechar shoyrei hadarlai. He takes us out of Galus Edom, the shar. Comes Mashiach ben David. He's compared to a chamar. Ani v'roichiv al chamar. And he's going to take us out of Galus Yishmael, compared to a chamar. Clearly the Gemara is saying, first Galus Edom ends, and then Galus Yishmael ends. I want to bring you one more support to this, who I would think is the last word on the subject. Did you know that Reb Chaim Kanievsky chimes in on what the last Galus will be, whether it's Galus Edom or Galus Yishmael? So I want to share with you first a Rashi in Zechariah, and how Reb Chaim uses this Rashi. We've said many times today, there are four Galusim: Bavel, Paras, Yavan, Edom. Rashi in Zechariah says on the 6th chapter in Tehillim, Lamnatseach al Hashminis, that the four Galusim are really 8. Each Galus is a dual Galus. How so? Bavel, Kazdi, Babylon, Chaldeans. Paras, Madai, Persia, Media. Yavan, Moikdan, Greece, Macedonia. Edom, Yishmael. Says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, you ever notice there's a song we sing the night of the Seder that has 8 characters? It's a song all the way at the end of the Seder. It's your favorite part of the Seder. It's called Chad Gadya. And did you know there are 8 characters in Chad Gadya? Besides the kid, Klal Yisrael, the Gadya, you have a cat, and a dog, and a stick, and a fire, and water, and an ox, and a shoichet, and a malach hamaves. Hey, you have 8 characters in the Chad Gadya. Says Reb Chaim, in his opinion, the 8 characters represent the 8 exiles. And he proves Kedarkoi B'Kodesh from Gemaras throughout Shas that the cat represents Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar pranced around, the Gemara says, like a cat. And Koresh of the Chaldeans, he licked his cup like a dog. And then the Persians, the Medes, are compared to a stick. And Achashverosh was Persian. He's a fire. And then Alexander the Great, he goes to the Garden of Eden, and the Gemara in Talmud says they sprinkle water on him, and he's water. And then the Greeks in Hanukkah, they made us write on the horn of a ox. That's the shar, Greece. And now we have 2 characters left. The shoichet and the malach hamaves. And we have 2 people applying for these 2 roles. Esav and Yishmael. Now, in my opinion, they're both highly qualified for either of these 2 positions. Okay, you have 2 vacancies, you have 2 openings, you have 2 job opportunities. You could be a shoichet, you could be a malach hamaves. In my opinion, they're both duly qualified, both highly qualified. and living in the United States of America, I would prefer to interpret, you know who the Shochet is? Because I want America to stand last. You know who the Shochet is? I would say it's Yishmael. Avram Avinu has a cow. He gave it to Yishmael, Rashi says, to train him in mitzvahs. Yishmael is known to be a Shochet. And you know who the angel of death is? My grandfather saw him in the Holocaust. Dr. Mengele, Esav, Edom. He's the angel of death. So I would like to sit back comfortably in America, think Yishmael is the Shochet, and then when he goes, last man standing is the United States of America. Says Reb Chaim, absolutely not. Says Reb Chaim, Esav is the Shochet. But says Reb Chaim, we know from many, many sources, the last Golos is Golos Yishmael. And Reb Chaim says, the Baal HaTurim says Yishmael is last. And the Midrashim say that Yishmael is last. And the Chazal tell us that all other exiles plunder money and Yishmael plunders souls, lives. Therefore, says Reb Chaim, last man standing is Golos Yishmael. And then, Ve'asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'shachat l'malach hamaves. Yishmael is the last Golos, says Reb Chaim. Now I know that does not make anybody feel good. And that does not make us feel comfortable. I would like to share with you a perspective on this. You know, when we study this Gemara, the Gemara says in the end of days there's a battle between two nations. Who's standing last? Rabbi Yochanan says last man standing is Yishmael, and Rav says last man standing is Roimi. We think there's going to be some kind of war, maybe nuclear war, and who's going to be the last man standing? But anyone who's a student of history knows about the Roman Empire. Did anybody conquer the Roman Empire? Was Rome invaded? Was Rome destroyed by marauders, by an army? Not at all. Nobody ever attacked the Roman Empire. So what happened to it? There was political disillusionment. It realized it was bereft of any value. It just broke apart from the seams, and it no longer was. Nobody conquered the Roman Empire. You know, when the Gemara says in the end of days there'll be two nations standing, could it be in the end of days there'll be two value systems in the world? There'll be maybe extremists, the Arab world. They stand for something. It's not correct. They have values. They're not good ones. And the United States of America and Rome, which was built on Judeo-Christian values, that's what it was built on. But is it still built on that? Are those still the foundation of our country? The values of the Bible? The values of the Old Testament? The values of human dignity? Or do we see political disillusionment? Do we see that we're living now in a time where the country, it's bereft of the values it was built upon? So when the Gemara says in the end of days, who will be the last man standing? Does it mean who will defeat who, or does it mean which value system will endure until the great day where HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals himself and he says, Einoid Movadai? It doesn't necessarily mean Paras will come and defeat Roimi. But like what we're seeing today, and we hope our stay in the wonderful country that we're in, it should last b'shalom u'v'shalva, harachaman hu yishbar uleinu me'al tzavarenu v'hu yolichenu kaimamios li'artzenu. But we're living in a time where it's not the invasion of Roimi, but it's Roimi disintegrating at the seams. And this may be what the Gemara is referring to. There will be two nations standing until Moshiach comes. But exactly which value system will continue to endure? That's a machlokes, and that's what we're witnessing in our lifetime. This is what we're watching unfold before our very eyes. Who will be the last one standing? The Rambam says, even the Nevi'im did not have a clear tradition. exactly how things will play out before Mashiach comes. But one thing we know, Ani mamin be'amuna shalema, bevias HaMashiach, v'af al pi sheyismamea im kol zeh achak eloi. As long as it takes, we don't lose hope, we don't dull our anticipation. You know, the Brisker Rav asked an amazing question, such a beautiful question. Since when did the Rambam become a Tosfos? In all the other animamins, animamin be'emunah shalema, it's a statement of fact. All of a sudden, when it comes to the coming of Mashiach, the Rambam has a kasha. Why is it taking so long? Answers the Rambam, I'm not sure. Why doesn't the Rambam ask other questions? Really? God has no physicality? Hashem, Yidei Hashem. Dibra Torah Koloshin B'nei Adam. The Rambam never asks questions and he doesn't give answers. Why, by the coming of Mashiach, does the Rambam have a question? V'af al pi sheyismamea. Says the Brisker Rav, the answer is very simple. The Rambam never asks questions and he doesn't give answers. There's no question here and there's no answer. There are two statements of fact. Statement of fact is, number one, Ani mamin bevias HaMashiach. But the Rambam writes in the Yad HaChazaka, Kol mi she'enoi mamin boy. If you don't believe in Mashiach, Oy mi she'enoi mechake lebiyasai. Or let's say you believe in Mashiach, but you say, look, I have a job. You let me know when he's here. In the meantime, I live my life the way I want to. Just let me know when he's here. Let me know when he's knocking. The Rambam writes, if someone does not actively await his coming, loy b'shar neviim belvad hu koifer ela b'toiras Moshe Rabbeinu. Not only is not believing in Mashiach heresy, not awaiting his coming is heresy. Therefore the Rambam says, Ani mamin be'emunah shalema bevias HaMashiach. I believe in his coming. But number two, af al pi sheyismamea im kol zeh achak eloi. Not a question and an answer. Statement of fact. So I'll end off, I'll conclude. So you'll say, come on, Mashiach didn't come for our grandparents. It didn't come for our great-grandparents. It didn't come for very righteous people, and it's going to come for us. We say every morning, and I can't say this enough, I came across this comment of Reb Shimon Schwab. It's just so beautiful. We say every morning, Ahava Rabba Ahavtanu. Most would translate it, Ahava Rabba, a great love you have loved us. Says Reb Schwab, it does not mean that. The word Rabba does not mean a lot, doesn't mean great. Rabba means expanding, increasing, getting bigger. God's love for the Jewish people is ever expanding, is ever growing. You know, if I would have asked you, who did God love more? Your grandparents or you? We probably all would have said Hashem loved our grandparents more than He loves us. It's not true. It's not true. God's love for the Jewish people is expanding. You know what the proof says, Reb Schwab? I remember when I was a kid, I was in high school, so the Rebbe would give a Gemara test. So if, for whatever reason you weren't paying attention one day, you would open up something called a Cincino Gemara. And you would, look at like an archaic English translation, and then you realize the Aramaic actually makes more sense than the English. And then they came out with something called Art Scroll on Masechta Makos, and I said, well, Art Scroll, maybe I could learn a Masechta on my own. And then they came out with Art Scroll on Parak HaMafgid, and now they have the whole Shas. And not only they have Art Scroll Shas, they have Art Scroll on nearly almost any sefer you can imagine. And if you don't know a Rashi in Shas, there's Mesifta Gemaras that explain every Rashi in Shas. There are Mesifta Gemaras that explain every Tosfos in Shas. Why do we have that? Why didn't our grandparents have that? There are more yeshivas today. There are more koilelim today. Says Reb Schwab, this is an expression of God's expanding love for the Jewish people. As much as Hashem loved our grandparents, we are even more irresistible to Him. And therefore the Chafetz Chaim writes, if you thought Mashiach didn't come before, how's He going to come now? Adarabah. We have a much better chance. We have a better chance because the Rebbeinu Shalom's love for His children grows and gets bigger, And as infinite as it was, it's now infinite to the next power. So the fourth juncture to await the coming of Moshiach is Galus Yishmael, right now. So when you say Shemona Esrei, Ki Lishuascha Kivinu Kol Hayom, when we daven Kabbalah Shabbos, every time we do a mitzvah that's Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, especially now in our times, let's wait for him, because he's just around the corner. Sheyavai b'mher v'yameinu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.